Welcome to our Husky Huddle Up podcast featuring our special guest, Adiam Tesfai from our Disability Resources for Students office. Hi, Adiam.
Hi, Jana.
Welcome to the podcast, Audio.
Hi, Carlos. Thanks for having me.
Hello. Definitely. Well, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction into who you are and
Yeah.
what you do?
Who are you, Adiam?
Who am I? That's usually my favorite question to ask people. Yeah. Like Jana said, my name is Adiam. I use she and her pronouns, and I am originally from Eritrea, East Africa, and my family is actually refugees to the United States, and we came to Phoenix. So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and then moved to Seattle in 2010. So it's been about a decade now that I have been in Seattle. Definitely not from here, but I love Seattle. I will say that, we talk at UW about bleeding purple or bleeding gold, and I do not, because I did not get any of my degrees at UW. But I very much appreciate being part of the staff here and being a part of the UW community and supporting students.
Yeah, and you've had several roles at UW. I know you were one of the first people at UW that I met. And so yeah, tell us a little bit about your path to your current role as Director of Disability Resources for Students.
Yeah, I was so excited actually to help hire Carlos. It was so much fun, yeah, to be on that committee. I got to get to be a part of bringing Carlos to the UW. It's always fun. Yeah, and I came to Seattle. I mean, I think I was kind of tired of Arizona is landlocked for those of you that don't know. And so growing up there forever, I was like, I need to get out to some water. I felt really called to the ocean, and I have no idea why, but it was like try something new. So that was fun. But I also knew that UW was like a great space in terms of like the community and the being a research institution and the type of support it provided students. So I was really excited to just apply and try to move to Seattle. And I got a job, and I was in academic support programs, running CLUE particularly, which is our tutoring center, general tutoring center on campus, one of many. So I had the great opportunity to create a space for students to come study and learn at night. We were open till midnight, so it was real fun. Lots of candy that we kept people awake, and then create some other programming around classes and coaching and mentoring in that role. For about 10 years, actually, a good chunk of my time, 9 or 10 years, was in that role. And then this last year, moved over to Disability Resources for Students, and so I've been working there for about a year and a couple months now. But yeah, been on campus almost a decade plus. Is kind of scary.
That's so great. I remember I was part of the interview process that was for your role, and we were very excited when you said yes. So that's so great. What a great way for you to always be in support of our students. We're so happy that you can talk about this particular work. If you could share just how your academic and career journey, that's such an interesting thing to choose this particular role at this point in time, and love to hear more about how you found your way there.
Yeah. So growing up in Phoenix, you're like, I got to get away. You're like, I got to move. So I was like, I can't go too far. You can't go out of state. Yeah, it was too hot. But I had always just wanted to experience, I think, just something different. Like I was always willing to kind of do something different. So I went to school 2 hours north of Phoenix, even though I was supposed to go to school 2 hours south of Phoenix in Tucson, which was the same temperature. It was really hot. It was really dry. But it was a really big school. And I visited U of A. Nothing against the U of A, but within minutes of my campus tour, I was like, I'm overwhelmed. And being a first generation college student, being an immigrant to the US, I was like, I'm going to be away from home, and this place is huge. And so I just felt really like, I don't think I'm supposed to come here. And so the next day, literally told my dad, let's drive up north to Flagstaff, and we got to do a campus tour. And he was like, no, we paid a deposit. Like, we're going to U of A. And I was like, no, we're not. And so we went to NAU literally the next day, senior year, spring break, I remember. And within 5 minutes of that tour, I was like, I'm home. Like, this is where I'm supposed to go to school. And I knew it. So that was awesome. And I stayed there. I got my bachelor's degree in speech pathology, minored in languages. And then I stayed there for my graduate work in educational psychology, and really wanted to help counsel college students the same way a bunch of people had helped mentor and counsel me, especially as a first gen student, especially as a student of color. So I really always have wanted to focus on educational equity and access and supporting those students who just sometimes have a harder time getting through that system. And so stayed there even after I got my master's at NAU, and worked for 4 years supporting underrepresented students and first gen students, which was great. And then came to UW to do the same thing in kind of a study skills support academic environment.
Oh wow! So, what I heard from that story was a tremendous amount of student agency about choosing where to go, which is really great. And your parents supporting you in that choice, even though there was a deposit already situated.
Yeah, my mom would tell you she did not support that in any way whatsoever. But also, being first generation college students, my parents also had no idea what they were doing. So they were like, yeah, you're the one that's going to tell us. You inform us. And so we would just tell them, which was unfortunate for them, but great for us. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of agency. I think being first gen, you kind of almost have no choice but to have a lot of agency because there isn't a lot of people directly to help you right away. But yeah, I think if it was up to my mom, I would have lived in her house to this day. So I don't know if she would tell you that was giving me
Yes.
agency. I was defying
Yes.
all rules, actually.
That's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about your current role. What does Disability Resources for Students do? How does how does that whole process work out for students?
Yeah, so our office is really here to ensure access in the educational environment for students. We also want to make sure students feel included, students with disabilities. And we serve all undergraduate, graduate, professional students, evening degree, all matriculated students essentially, to get whatever academic accommodations and adjustments they need for their coursework at the university. And so it's really important for us to meet with the student to figure out what it is that they need so that we can figure out exactly what to put in place. And so some of the things we offer, we do academic accommodations, particularly obviously for courses. And that might look like, things like, and sorry, exams that they might need to have in a different format, documents they might need to have in a format, captioners for classes. There's a lot of different things that academic accommodations. It could just be notification that this student, might need to wear a hat even in class or glasses. I mean, there's really simple things that are kind of just notifying people on campus. And then we also actually give exam administering in our own office. So faculty can administer an exam with the accommodations we gave a student, or we can administer the exam in our office when we're open. We're not open at the current moment, but fall, we're excited to be open and serve students. And then we have a team of people also that then do our accessible instructional materials. So if a student actually does need a document in a different format for a disability reason, our team would then do that for that student, give it to the faculty, and then it's able to be displayed for everybody in the class. So there's us trying to make sure kind of everything is universal design and accessible for all, even if someone didn't ask. And then we do some other things like housing. We inform housing about accommodations for students. We have classroom relocations. We have some text and tools that we actually will like modify for a student and give to the student to use. So lots of different types of support that either comes directly from our office or we're informing the rest of campus that the student has the ability to have their classroom environment in a different way.
I appreciate the comprehensiveness of it, right? So, like working with other offices, like housing, I think is such an important part of supporting students, especially students who are coming to UW with disabilities.
And I just want to make sure that we can at least say and ask this question: what is an academic accommodation? Just for families, you're first gen, I'm first gen. When it comes to coming to to U.S. campus, that was not a term that would probably be recognizable to a lot of people. But so I'd love to just say at least that, like how you can explain to our families what is that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I usually define that. So sorry. Yeah, so we would call anything that is an academic adjustment or an aid or service. And so anything that essentially would have to give somebody equal access to engage in the classroom environment as everybody else, but that they can't because of a disability. So I think of like a really extreme example a lot of times for students is or families is a blind student. They obviously can't engage in class the same way everybody else can, because if they can't see the board or the PowerPoint, how the heck are they even engaging, right? So then we would do same thing, whether our office is actually doing the adjustment of that PowerPoint or the physical environment of that classroom for that student, or it's just maybe notifying that like that student has to sit in the front, for instance, if they have just low vision versus being blind. So it's just making sure we provide a different way that student might need to engage to be able to then equally have access and engage to that classroom like everybody else.
That's great because it is, and it ties in with exactly what we're trying to do here, which is what is student success like? And student success like is very, very different for every single student here.
Yes.
But we want to make sure that we all have everybody on an equitable plane when it comes to learning. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And that there's no quiz, families, but
Yeah.
I might, I might ask that question. So.
Well, I'm sure, Adium, I'm sure that the program has evolved over time, and especially during the pandemic. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the history of the program, and then kind of how has it evolved, and especially over this past year of, remote environments, and then potentially even what are some plans as we come back to the fall?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the great, awesome story we get to tell about our office is we were founded in 1978, and that was 43 years before the ADA. And if you don't know the ADA, it's the Americans with Disability Act, and that's a law that was signed that would say that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everybody else, and it protects their civil rights, similar to, as we say, we protect right based on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, and religion. So this ADA, this law was signed, but we were in office 12 years before it was even signed. So the UW really committed, right, to supporting people with disabilities, students with disabilities, particularly in this office, which is awesome. And then, I think the things that people don't think about are kind of what counts as a disability and how we've grown. So even just our office in general, I mean, we have doubled in the number of students we serve in the last 5 years. And what people kind of traditionally saw disability, right? Vision, hearing, and physical mobility, like wheelchair, were like the biggest things we used to consider back in the day. And actually, like psychological, emotional, mental health is the largest category of disabilities that we serve right now. And so it's interesting even to think about the types of things. Like I said, that example of a blind student is not the same anymore when you think about somebody with depression or PTSD or anxiety, and how do you accommodate that in a classroom? Particularly maybe sometimes when the trigger for your PTSD might be around being around a lot of people in one space. And so we even have to think about how do we accommodate that person to have equal access the same way we would like make sure that there's a ramp for somebody in a wheelchair. And so we have to evolve kind of our thinking, which is always fun. Sometimes a challenge when you have certain limitations on our campus, but been great. And COVID, oh, the pandemic. What's been real interesting for us is how do we help shift faculty really in thinking, how can your classroom, which is no longer a physical classroom, be accessible to these students, right? So sometimes the physical limitations aren't there because students can be at home, but things like taking an exam in a reduced distraction or a private room because you need to not be distracted because of your disability, right? Maybe you have ADHD. And so how do we make sure that space, and now you're at home and you have roommates or you have family, and so now your space definitely is not a reduced distraction environment, and they still have to ensure that we still have to ensure as a campus that student has that in a remote setting. So we've kind of had to just shift to giving guidance to faculty and students about all the ways they might kind of implement their accommodation in a virtual setting, because even to your point earlier, Jenna, it's already individual for every student, and now we have one student has their own apartment and they have a private space, and this other person has a family but they might have the same accommodation. And so we just have to give guidance more than we can really say this is how you have to do it. And so it's been great to be able to work with students and faculty, say like, what do you have, what does this person need, how do we do that, and then give some tips. And that's been a lot of what we've really been doing, is trying to say here's a whole lot of different ways this might look, try this and get back to us and let us know, student. And it's always evolving for us and the student too. They can come back multiple times and let us know things aren't working, and then we'll figure out what else we need to do.
I like that it's continuous. It's not just a one-time kind of conversation. I mean, it's not like they're only going to take one class, you know. So it's really wonderful kind of relationship that you're going to be building with these students. They'll always coming to you, which is really great.
Yeah, and we want them to, right? We want every time something feels like it's changed so that they can come back and let us know, because their disability changes and the way they experience that changes and the environment they're in changes. And so we always want to make sure they know that they can come tell us that.
Well, I'm sure a lot of families, even listening right now, might have a lot of questions kind of just feeling in their head. I'm wondering, what sort of questions do you normally get from students? And maybe that could be a good way to maybe preemptively answer some of the questions that maybe families are thinking about right now.
Yeah, some the kind of bigger questions we get are, does X count as a disability, or is this diagnosis count as a disability? And that's a little bit harder because definitely they would have to, come in and talk to us and let us know what they're going through. But we will say, disability is something that significantly limits, right, somebody's life functions in one or more kind of areas. And so it's sleeping, eating, learning, those types of things. So making sure that like that student has the opportunity to check in with us about that, and then we can hopefully help answer that. But really, if they're feeling limited and impacted in their learning, or for us eating, sleeping, because they live on campus sometimes, then that's something that's counted as a disability, and then we figure out what we could accommodate. A lot of times, students who haven't been diagnosed or need like a more recent diagnosis will hear questions about that. How do I get a diagnosis? And so, if they are looking for those spaces, we have a list of external resources on our website. We obviously have our own counseling center and Hall Health on campus, so at least in the meantime, they can go there and get some resources, or they can ask our staff and we can point them to some specific places that we work with on campus, as well as a little bit more externally. And then another question we get a lot of times is kind of like support systems on campus. We love that students come to us and we provide accommodations, but we also want them to know, like, if they're a student employee, for instance, Disability Services Office, DSO, if they're a student employee, then they need employment accommodations there. And so they would go there if they worked at your front desk, for instance, Carlos, right? And then also for classrooms, they would come to us. And then there's the D Center, which is the Disability and Deaf Cultural Center on campus. And they have space students can hang out. They have a light sensitivity room. They do programming and events, a lot of teaching the campus and supporting kind of disability culture and uplifting that. The Student Disability Commission is part of our ASU Dub. It's another great space for students to connect in with other students around community and advocacy related to disability. So making sure they feel like our office is not the only place that they can always go to a lot. And those are just a few examples. And then you mentioned
Well, and
this
the D Center,
yeah.
the D Center
Yes.
is also new in the hub, right? You
Yes.
just got a new location.
Yeah, they got a new location. They're a different office than us, but we work really closely with them. And yeah, they have a new cool spot in the hub, which is great. If you're on campus, families, next time you're here, definitely go into the hub and see that space. And then another common question we get, you mentioned this, Jana, earlier, was housing. So a lot of times people will say, like, well, I want to live on campus. Is that possible? Or how would I do that? And like I said, we evaluate all of those disability accommodation requests, and then we inform Housing and Food Services, HFS. And so we would say, ADIUM has this accommodation for housing, and then they would go and make sure there's the room available, or the space that needs to be accommodated in what way for that student. So they would still come to us first, and then we would inform housing. They do have to make sure they have applied for housing first. And so they will have to have applied, and then, but before they're placed, housing would check with us, and then we would make sure they're informed of what the student needs.
When you started this role, how has it actually, when you started working at UW, how have you seen this expand? Because it feels so it feels much more expansive, so to speak, than just the one little room, or the one or the 2 or 3 staff members, because the population that you serve is not just at UW Seattle. It's inclusive of Bothell and Tacoma.
Yeah, we work really closely with the directors of Bothell and Tacoma, because students can take classes on any of the 3 campuses, even if they have one home campus. So we have to work really close with them to make sure our systems and processes are the same. We want students to have a similar experience. So it's great. They're at meetings with us every week. We connect with them all the time. Some things look different, right? Housing particularly is obviously really different at each campus. So we wouldn't do that necessarily together, but we consult with each other all the time. And then our team, this office for years has kind of had a smaller team, and luckily people have seen the need for that. Disability has grown. Like I said, our office has grown. I mean, double in size of students that we serve. We're serving, over 4,500 students right now. And so needing to make sure students can see us and come in and get in the door. Yeah. And then that we can accommodate them. I mean, if we get you in the door, we got to make sure we can do accommodations. And then I think the one thing people don't always realize, because this is tied to a law, right? We are held by law to make sure these accommodations happen in a timely fashion for students. So it's great, because that's another, I think just support the student has to know this is happening for them. But for us, it's like we kind of have to check those balances. And so making sure we're connecting with people across campus has to happen, because so many other partners for us are what help us make sure the students accommodated. We definitely could not do that alone in our office. But our team has definitely grown over the last couple of years. Before I got here, and even since I've been here, we've grown. So it's been great, because we can see more students and try to make sure we get more resources and more communication with students faster, so they get the support they need.
I often wondered if you have student workers that are helping
Yes.
other students.
Absolutely. We love it. So, part of our accessible classroom academic services team actually is about 30 part time student and just part time employees. So, all of the students who are, are using accommodations like remediating a PDF file to be screen reader, text to speech, making a book braille for a student, right? Who are making sure captions are on a video that a professor's showing in class. We actually have a team of 2 professional staff, and the rest are 30 or so student and part-time employees that really just help us do that work. So it's awesome because they get to use their skill set if they're coming from like a tech, especially because remediating a file, is a lot of tech skills. And if they don't have that at all, it's totally okay. Our professional team help train them, and then they get to support their peers. We also have a front desk staff, so absolutely all of our front desk student staff when we're open are students. And then our testing center, actually all of that front desk staff for the testing center are students, and actually a couple of them are leads, so they help supervise and support the other testing student employees that are there. We hire a bunch of graduate students and interns as well. And then another opportunity when we're administering exams, we have to hire other students to help us because there's just too many exams during midterms and finals. And so we don't call them proctors, they're administrators, but we hire other students to help administer exams when we need to make sure our students have that. And a lot of times they are also students receiving services in our office. So we definitely want to promote that students with disabilities can work anywhere and they can do anything. They sometimes might need a little bit of other resources, but they can definitely work, and we want them to. So yeah, we definitely help make sure they can find other places on campus to work or work for us if nothing else.
That's so great. All right, families, you heard it. If somebody's very passionate, they're always looking for a few good Huskies
Always.
over at DRS.
Always.
Definitely. Well, and with serving like, I think you mentioned 4,500 students, you probably have some pretty good processes in place. What do families need to think about, especially if they are supporting a student who will need accommodations as they get started in the fall? What are some kind of checklist of items or just some tips that you feel are most important?
Yeah, so the biggest one is, timelines, our processes with that many students and want to make sure everybody has everything before the quarter starts. It does take at max, and it depends obviously on the accommodation, 6 weeks for a student's accommodations to be fully implemented. So that means 6 weeks prior to the start of a quarter, a student will have to have either applied for our office if they're not already in and gotten in and had their meeting, or if they're already in every quarter, 6 weeks prior to that quarter, they have to also activate their accommodations. So we make sure we can put them in place. Because the last thing we want is day one of the quarter and the student doesn't have anything in place, right? Some accommodations take less time. We have a service timeline on our website, so we definitely tell families to check that out. But we want to make sure that the most, longest accommodation for us to implement, that gives students the maximum amount of time for us to put that in. So that's the first one, really big one. Like timing is really everything for our office. You can always apply after. You can always activate after. It just doesn't guarantee you get it exactly when you want, right? Depending on what it is. The other big thing I want families to know, and students particularly, this is a big thing for students because I know the stigma around disability and maybe how it worked in their previous institutions, is confidentiality. Confidentiality is so important to our office, and so we want students to know only a few people who have a need to know about your accommodations will know about your accommodations. It is not that we tell everybody. There's only a select group of people, and particularly the people who are helping us implement, right? So a lot of times that's instructors, might be housing, for instance, but maybe the instructor has a TA, or maybe they have some people centrally in their office, like advisors on that department, who actually do some of the accommodation implementation. So sometimes other people might know, but that's just the accommodation. The disability is never divulged to anybody ever unless the student does it. And they're more than welcome to, students, you are more than welcome to do that, but it is not expected of you ever, and no one else. So your peers wouldn't know unless you told them at all. So just we want to make sure that is emphasized for students. I know that's a little bit different from when you were in high school maybe and you were pulled out, or you went to a special classroom, or had special service in your classroom. In this case, you can just email us. You can have a Zoom meeting right now, and then you can decide if you want to actually participate in things. But really, your accommodations always happen confidentially of your disability. The other thing that I want to mention too is people don't always know what counts as a disability, right? So a lot of times, like I said, we think about these kind of bigger visual things, but we want students to know that depression, PTSD, anxiety, cancer treatments, but also things that are short term. And so if you break your leg, right, if you all of a sudden have a head injury and the doctors are saying, oh, that will only be a couple months and you'll be fine, that we will still accommodate. We have our short-term disability accommodation, so we'll put things in place temporarily. Broken leg, we can help you get a van around campus, right? We can get somebody a smart pen so you can take notes if you broke your writing hand. All of those types of things can happen for 6 months, let alone the entirety of your career here if you need that. And then the other part of that is, I think, thinking outside of the classroom environment. Students do internships and study abroad and clinical, all these other spaces, and we want to make sure they know we do accommodate that if it's tied to their academics. But they have to let us know because those are also really tricky, and so we got to do that far in advance as well. But those spaces get accommodated. And then the last thing is just that we're here. Like, we want students to know that we're here for consult, we're here for drop-in. Students can always make a consultation or drop-in appointment. We have a prospective student appointment, and that the student is really for the student. We primarily want that space to be for the student to engage and ask us questions. Parents and families are always welcome to call the front desk and ask general questions, but particular to that student and that accommodation needs or their disability, we want those consultations to be for the student. And students have the choice to bring anybody they want to those spaces, and that's for sure. But those spaces are really for us to engage with the students so we can help them understand how our office works, what they need, and how we could actually make sure they get what they need while they're here. So those are kind of my takeaways for families.
Yeah, that's great. What I'm hearing is really pre-planning is something that needs to be part of this process. And so, but yeah, that's awesome.
And we'll definitely share that website about service timeline. I think that's really, really helpful for our families to see. Well, we're probably going to be sharing that in family orientation. We'll do it in the newsletters, but we're also going to make sure that the link is here when we have this episode launched.
Thank you. We also have a getting started tab on our page too. That would be helpful.
Yeah.
That's like helps students kind of know like what's the guidelines, what's the requirements, all that. So both of those would be, the timeline is helpful as you're thinking about accommodations, but even the getting started page is a good kind of tip.
That's great. And it sounds like autumn is a very, very, very busy time. So it's
Yes.
good to plan now.
Yes, absolutely. And we love seeing new families. You can totally make your appointment now. If you've started your signing up for A&O, then they can turn in their stuff for our office and their application, even before they've signed up for A&O if they want. And they can get some things in place, obviously, before their classes are registered. So please, students, sign up, go to the website, fill out the little purple button midway through the homepage. It's apply, and get that in. Because, yeah, the sooner you can get that done, the better off you'll be for fall.
Well, Adiam, thank you so much. And thank you to you and your team for really providing such an important resource to the campus. I mean, I learned a lot about a lot of the things that are happening out of DRS that, and I've been here 6 years that I didn't even know about. So I really appreciate you chatting with us today.
Yeah, thank you both for having me.
Thank you so much, Adiam. And I hope you have a really great day and have a great summer. And thanks, everybody. Disability.uw.edu, and then we'll make sure all of the links is accessible to you.
Yeah, thank you.
The Husky Huddle podcast is a collaboration between the University of Washington first-year programs and parent and family programs. It's to provide parents and families equitable access to information in support of their students' success. The Husky Huddle Up is produced by Chloe Giselle, a junior in the UW Cinema and Media Studies program.